In a land where law meant survival, one sheriff didn't just enforce order, he hunted it down. His name was Texas John Slaughter, and Outlaws had a saying, "If slaughter is on your trail, run until you hit the ocean." This is the true, untold biography of Texas John Slaughter, the fearless Wild West sheriff who never backed down, never lost a gunfight, and never let a guilty man walk free. Texas John Slaughter was not born into comfort. He entered the world in 1841, when the land around him was still wild, unsettled, and dangerous. His family lived near the Brazos River in Texas, a place where cattle roamed freely, horses moved like shadows across the plains, and law often arrived too late. Children grew up fast, because the frontier did not wait for innocence to fade. It simply took it. John was one of many children in a large pioneer family. He did not have toys, schools, or safe playgrounds. His playground was open land, filled with rattlesnakes, coyotes, and dust storms. His early teachers were not schoolmasters. They were cowhands, wranglers, and hardened riders who taught him how to survive before they taught him how to spell his name. By age 10, John already rode horses with skill far older than his years. He could lasso a calf, help move cattle, and sit still in the saddle for long hours without complaint. He understood something most adults struggled to learn. The frontier rewarded discipline and punished weakness. John was quiet, focused, and observant. He watched the way experienced wranglers worked with animals. He listened to the stories told around campfires, stories of raids, stampedes, broken bones, lost herds, and gunfights. He learned that life could change in a single moment. The Slaughter family worked cattle for a living, and cattle life was never peaceful. Stampedes could wipe out entire herds in one night. Thunderstorms could cause rivers to rise suddenly and drown horses, cattle, and riders. Restless men who stole cattle were always watching for opportunity. John saw how hard his father worked to protect his family and his herd. Every sunrise brought chores, sweat, dust, and danger. The young boy absorbed every detail. One early lesson carved itself into John's memory. A stampede broke loose during a lightning storm. Cattle panicked and rushed into the dark. Riders shouted, horses reared, and hooves shook the earth. John held on to a fence post and watched men disappear into the storm. He could only see flashes of lightning, revealing bodies fighting for control of terrified animals. Hours passed. Before dawn brought peace again, some cattle were gone forever. One rider never returned. John understood a truth that would stay with him forever. Nature does not care who you are. Either you survive or you do not. This knowledge hardened him, but it did not make him cruel. It made him calm. He realized that fear never helped anyone during a crisis. The men who survived were steady and thoughtful. They stayed focused through chaos. They did not waste breath on panic. John developed a reputation even as a child. When others became nervous, he remained steady. When a frightened horse kicked or a calf struggled, he handled the animal gently. Other cowhands noticed that he was not loud, reckless, or emotional. He worked like a man who understood that every mistake could cost a life. Around this time, John began to learn Spanish from Mexican vaqueros. The Southwest was a multicultural world. Cowboys came from many backgrounds: Anglo, Mexican, indigenous. Blackhand, the best riders were often Mexican or native. They were experts with horses, cattle, and knives. They showed young John tricks and skills that could only be learned through hard experience. John respected these men deeply. He never saw them as outsiders or servants. He admired their discipline and grace. Many early historians ignored the cultural mix of the frontier, but John never did. His world was not a Hollywood Western. It was a land where every skilled hand was welcome, no matter where they were born. As John grew older, he spent long days on trail rides. Cowboys sometimes drove cattle hundreds of miles to new grazing land or trading posts. These rides were slow and exhausting. The sun-baked skin, wind-filled eyes with sand, and nights could freeze bones. But John never complained. Hardship was normal to him. During these journeys, he learned how to track prints across dirt, identify fresh cattle brands, and read weather signs in clouds and wind. He learned how to find water by watching birds and how to choose the safest route through rattlesnake country. The land became his silent teacher. One day, when John was still a teenager, a group of bandits tried to steal a small part of the family herd. John's father and two riders spotted the thieves. The confrontation was tense. Men shouted in Spanish and English. Horses moved in circles, and rifles were raised. John watched from a distance as his father negotiated first. Words did not work. Shots were fired, dust filled the air, horses panicked, and one bandit fell. John did not celebrate. He did not cheer or smile. He stood behind a mesquite bush and watched how quickly life could end when law was absent. He learned something important. Violence was not exciting. Violence was final. In that moment, John understood that men who carried guns should carry responsibility as well. A gun was not a symbol of pride. It was a tool that should never speak unless justice demanded it. When the riders returned home, John stood in silence. That night, he stared into the campfire and replayed what he had seen. There was no music, no glory, no heroism, only fear, dust, blood, and quiet. His father placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Son, a man must protect what is his, but the quickest trigger is rarely the bravest heart." From that evening forward, John believed justice did not come from loud threats or dramatic gestures. Justice came from calm confidence, preparation, and moral clarity. He was becoming something rare. A young cowboy who controlled not only his horse and his weapon, but his emotions. By the time John Slaughter reached early adulthood, the frontier had shaped him into a skilled horseman and a cautious observer. Yet the land was becoming more violent. Settlers clashed with raiders, cattle rustlers hid along riverbanks, and bandits crossed borders without fear. Many towns did not have judges, jails, or reliable sheriffs. Law existed only where brave men carried it on horseback. John did not grow restless or angry. He grew responsible. He believed every community needed people who would stand up against danger, even if their own name never became famous. When he was old enough, he joined the Texas Rangers, one of the toughest law enforcement groups in the West. The Texas Rangers were not like the polished uniforms later seen in movies. They were plain riders with worn coats, dusty hats, and tired horses. They traveled across long distances, slept under the sky, and relied on each other for survival. They could not wait for backup. They were the backup. The Rangers taught John something formal. A man of the law needed to strength calmness in thought and quickness in judgment. A mistake could mean the loss of a good man, a family, or a whole cattle herd. John learned to move slowly when danger was uncertain and strike only when danger was real. His first assignment involved tracking a small gang of horse thieves near the Red River. The thieves moved at night, stole fast horses, and disappeared before sunrise. For weeks, the Rangers searched, often riding in circles, eating cold beans, and sleeping with rifles close by. The work was slow, frustrating, and quiet. But John never rushed. He studied hoofprints, broken grass, and the shape of dust clouds left on the horizon. He learned to tell if a horse was tired, frightened, or recently ridden. This was a new kind of hunting, not for animals, but for men. One evening, the Rangers found a campsite where the thieves had recently cooked a meal. The ground still held warm ashes. John walked the perimeter and noticed something unusual. Cigarette butts for sets of boot prints, and marks where horses had kicked against tether ropes. He placed his hand above the ashes and whispered, "They were here less than 2 hours ago." No one else had noticed. The captain nodded, impressed. John was not loud or proud, but his eyes caught details others missed. Before sunrise, the Rangers moved again. After a long chase through sandy gullies and thick brush, they finally caught the thieves. A short gunfight ended the pursuit. 2 thieves were captured, 1 escaped, and 1 died. John did not celebrate victory. He did not brag. He did not raise his voice. He simply watered his horse, wiped the dust from his revolver, and prepared for the next mission. He understood what many young cowboys did not. True law work was not excitement. It was patience. Over the next few months, John's skills became widely respected. He mastered long-distance shooting, learned quiet ambush tactics, and practiced tracking under the moonlight. He also learned diplomacy. Some conflicts could be solved without bullets by talking, understanding customs, or respecting boundaries. This made him valuable when the Rangers needed to negotiate with Mexican ranching families or native groups. John used his Spanish and cultural respect to prevent violence where other lawmen might have chosen force. Even as a young man, he believed that justice should never begin with pride. One night, while camped near a dry creek bed, John sat with the captain. The older man studied him and said, "Slaughter, you are different from the others. You do not chase glory, you chase fairness. That is rare out here." John did not answer, but he felt the compliment settle deeply into his spirit. Not long after, a larger and more dangerous mission arrived. A group of cattle rustlers had grown bold, attacking ranches and stealing livestock from isolated families. These thieves were not desperate drifters. They were organized. They used scouts, false trails, and fast horses. They moved at night and hid in canyon shadows during daylight. For 2 weeks, the Rangers tried to locate them. The rustlers always stayed 1 or 2 days ahead. The frustration grew heavier every night. Some men complained, others cursed the dry heat, and horses became thin and restless. John stayed focused. He believed there was always a sign, always. A mistake, always a piece of evidence that led forward. He simply had to look long enough. One morning, he found a single boot print near a watering hole. It was half covered by hoof marks, but the shape was clear. It did not match the boots of any ranger. John studied the ground. The boot print faced north. That meant the rustlers were not fleeing toward Mexico. They were heading deeper into Texas, toward rough hills and hidden pastures. John shared his observation with the captain. Another ranger questioned him, saying it could have been an old print. John shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "The edges are sharp. It was made after the last night's dew." The Rangers turned north. Before sunset, they sighted smoke from a campfire. Silence fell. Rifles were drawn. Horses stepped slowly through brush. The rustlers tried to escape. A fierce chase followed across dry gulches and rocky slopes. Dust rose like smoke and bullets cracked through empty space. John fired only when necessary. He aimed with precision, not panic. A wounded rustler fell, and 2 others surrendered. The mission was over. When the captain thanked John for his tracking, he simply replied, "A man who steals livestock steals someone's life. We protect families, not just cattle." That night, listening to coyotes and watching firelight dance, John understood the deeper meaning of his work. Law was not punishment. Law was safety. He was no longer just a ranch boy or cowboy. He was learning how to become something far greater. A quiet hunter of injustice. A man who restored balance, not fame. When John Slaughter left the Texas Rangers, he did not dream of a quiet life. The frontier did not allow comfort, and John did not want comfort. He wanted purpose. He believed the best way to build stability for a family, a community, or a whole region was through honest work. For him, that work meant cattle. After years of riding under other men, John saved enough money to run cattle on his own. He bought a few head at first, then slowly grew his herd. He did not rush, gamble, or cheat. He believed that if a man built something slowly and carefully, it would last longer than anything gained by chance. John worked like the sun, steady every day, rising with a plan and setting after every task was done. His small operation soon grew into a serious ranching business. He hired good riders, trained them well, and expected them to show responsibility. He paid fair wages, demanded honest bookkeeping, and never tolerated waste or laziness. People noticed that everything John touched ran smoothly. Trails were planned, supplies were stocked, records were accurate. He did not shout orders. He spoke quietly, and men listened. They trusted him because he trusted them. He created a team, not a staff. The hardest part of ranching was trail driving, moving cattle across hundreds of miles to market towns or railheads. Trail drives were dangerous and slow. Each mile carried risk: storms, river crossings, thieves, disease, and stampedes. A single storm could scatter cattle into the darkness. A swollen river could carry away horses and men. Bandits waited in lonely valleys. Nature and human greed were constant enemies. Most trail bosses gave up or grew reckless from frustration. John remained calm. He understood that the frontier did not reward emotion. The land rewarded patience. One of the longest drives John led stretched from deep Texas to Kansas. He took a crew of tough cowhands, cook wagons, and hundreds of restless cattle. Every hoofbeat kicked dust into the wind. Every sunrise carried new work. During the first week, the crew faced a brutal thunderstorm. Lightning ripped the sky open. Horses trembled, cattle stampeded in blind panic, and men shouted through sheets of cold rain. John did not panic. He rode forward, steady on the saddle, waving his hat and calling his men to follow him. He circled the herd, guiding the terrified animals into a wide loop. Hours passed before the storm eased. The crew looked exhausted and shaken. John simply nodded, rubbed down his horse, and checked head counts. He did not raise his voice or give speeches. He believed leadership was quieter than thunder. After the stampede, one of the younger cowhands asked how John remained calm in such danger. John looked at him and said, "If I panic, the cattle panic. If the cattle panic, we lose everything. So I stay calm." It was a simple sentence, but it explained John's entire personality. He managed chaos by refusing to become part of it. Weeks later, the trail group reached a wide river. The current looked innocent at first, but strong rains upstream had filled it with hidden force. The water could drown animals in minutes. Crossing too quickly could destroy the entire drive. Many trail bosses would have forced a crossing anyway, choosing speed over safety. John stopped and studied the riverbank. He walked into the water up to his waist, feeling the pull of the current. He examined the shallow points and watched the way tree branches moved downstream. He ordered the herd to wait one full day. His men looked confused. Delay meant cost. But John trusted the land more than the clock. The next morning, water levels dropped just enough. The herd crossed slowly, with riders guiding the lead animals through safe channels. A few cows struggled, but survived. The rest made it to dry ground. Had they crossed the night before, many would have drowned. John looked back at the river and murmured, "Nature tells you everything, if you are patient enough to listen." He taught this principle to every new rider. On another part of the trail, the crew spotted distant riders shadowing them. These were rustlers ready to steal cattle when darkness provided cover. The riders stayed far away, but never vanished. Most cowhands prepared for a fast, violent confrontation. But John did not want bullets. He preferred certainty. He watched the land carefully, learned the hills and gullies, noted which streams were safe for travel and which paths could trap thieves. Then, he did something no one expected. He split the herd at night. One group stayed hidden, in a small canyon guarded by riders. The other continued moving with lanterns and noise, a distraction. Rustlers followed the wrong herd. When they attacked the decoy, they found only a handful of cattle and several armed riders waiting in silence. The thieves panicked and fled. The true herd stayed safe without a single gunshot. John Slaughter believed something deeply. The best gunfight is the one you never need to start. The crew followed him for months, often in harsh heat, unpredictable storms, and lonely plains, without shelter. But they trusted John because he trusted his own preparation more than luck. He was not a gambler, he was a strategist. The long drive ended in Kansas with all cattle sold at a strong profit. When cowhands received their pay, one man said, "I've worked for bosses who fought storms with anger. You fight storms with plans." John smiled. Hard work meant nothing without smart work. Over the next few years, John's name spread across Texas and into Arizona. He wasn't famous like a gunfighter. He was respected like an engineer, someone who could build a world where chaos could not win. Families, merchants, and ranchers admired him. Not because he was fearless, but because he was thoughtful. Not because he was loud, but because he brought order to places where fear usually lived. He believed that a strong ranch was more than cattle. It was stability, it was proof that civilization could rise from danger. John Slaughter was becoming more than a cowboy. He was becoming a builder of peace in a land that did not yet know peace. As John Slaughter's success as a cattleman continued, the frontier around him began to shift. The great cattle trails were changing. New towns were forming along railroad lines. Many regions in Texas were stabilizing, slowly turning from rough, dangerous wilderness into more organized settlements. But not all places grew peaceful. There was one town in the Arizona territory that was still trapped between dreams and danger. It was known everywhere as Tombstone, a name that carried stories of gunfights, mining fortunes, and restless saloons. Tombstone was booming because silver had been discovered in nearby hills. Miners rushed in from everywhere, digging fast and living hard. For every honest miner, there seemed to be a gambler, a drifter, or a liquor runner ready to take advantage of the chaos. Streets became crowded with tents, wagons, and strangers from distant states and countries. Money flowed quickly, and crime followed closely. Gambling houses lit up the night with loud music and heavy drinking. Hotels filled with men who had never seen such quick wealth. Storekeepers made fortunes selling supplies. But with no strong law enforcement, greed and violence worked side by side. Stagecoaches were robbed on dusty trails. Cattle disappeared from ranches without a trace. Horses were stolen in darkness and ridden into Mexico. Many men in Tombstone tried to bring order, including Wyatt Earp and his brothers. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral had already taken place years earlier, leaving tension across Cochise County like smoke that never fully cleared. Some outlaws fled Tombstone after the IRPs left. Others grew bolder, believing the town was once again vulnerable. Rustler gangs formed outside town, hiding in canyon hideouts and moving back and forth between Arizona and Mexico. For settlers who lived outside Tombstone, life became frightening. They worked hard, built fences, and planted crops, but had no protection. With no strong sheriff, criminals knew they could steal livestock or threaten families without consequence. During this time, John Slaughter traveled through southern Arizona to scout new ranching land. He saw the beauty of the wide valleys, the tall grass, and the mountain shadows. But he also sensed danger. He heard stories from families who lived along the border. People whispered, "We need someone strong. We need someone who does not scare." The more John listened, the more he realized something important. Arizona needed law, and not just from paper or speeches. It needed a law from a person who understood danger, patience, and justice. John Slaughter bought land near the border and built a ranch that would later grow into one of the most respected properties in the territory. But as he settled in, he could not ignore what was happening across Cochise County. Outlaws roamed freely. Business owners paid for private guards. Families slept with rifles beside their beds. Even the lawmen who tried to help were limited by fear, politics, or lack of support. John never sought fame or applause, but he believed something deeply. If the law does not protect honest people, then the law means nothing. He attended community meetings, listened to ranchers' complaints, and quietly studied local leadership. He remained calm, respectful, and observant. Eventually, trusted elders asked him if he would run for sheriff. John did not answer immediately. Being sheriff was not a prize, it was responsibility. It meant stepping into conflict every single day. It meant chasing criminals across open desert without rest. It meant restoring peace where violence had become normal. But John understood the need. He watched one elderly rancher lose half his cattle to thieves. He saw a stagecoach ambushed only a few miles from town. He learned about families sleeping in barns because they feared nighttime intruders. He knew he could not remain silent. So when election season arrived, John Slaughter announced his candidacy for Cochise County Sheriff. His campaign was not flashy. He did not spend money on posters or speeches. He did not promise riches or comfort. He spoke only one sentence that everyone remembered: "I never turn loose a guilty man." That sentence spread like wind. Some people were thrilled, finally. A man who was serious. Others were afraid. They wondered if John would be too strict. Outlaws were terrified because they knew his personality. He did not threaten. He did not dramatize. He acted. On election day, John Slaughter won. His reputation as a cattleman, a ranger, and a disciplined leader made him the perfect choice. People did not vote for him because he was charming. They voted for him because history had proven that he could restore order. As sheriff, John quickly discovered that Tombstone and the surrounding region were far more complicated than Texas. Rustlers crossed the border, disappearing into Mexico before lawmen could follow. Mining camps were full of drunk brawls and gambling conflicts. Disputes between ranchers and miners often became violent before sunrise. John studied everything before taking action. He visited ranches, met business owners, and listened carefully. 2 local complaints. He learned the weak spots in the county: isolated roads, unguarded water holes, and trails that thieves used to escape. Unlike other sheriffs, he did not sit in an office waiting for crime to come to him. He rode the open land, scouting miles of desert, canyon trails, and border crossings. He brought justice to the frontier by meeting danger where it lived, and the criminals learned quickly. John Slaughter was not a sheriff who reacted. He hunted. He tracked suspects through windblown sand, followed hoofprints across dry riverbeds, and used his Spanish to speak with ranchers on both sides of the border. He built relationships, gained information, and created alliances. He did not fight crime with anger. He fought it with intelligence. Within months, small gangs began leaving Cochise County. Others stayed hidden in fear. They whispered his name around campfires. Slaughter does not give up. If he is on your trail, disappear. Families finally felt a shift. Peace did not arrive instantly, but danger felt less comfortable. The land was still wild, but for the first time in years, law had a heartbeat again. John Slaughter took the office of sheriff with calm confidence. He did not ask for a large group of deputies. He did not ask for political favors. He only asked for one thing: accurate information about criminal activity. He believed that the most powerful weapon a sheriff could carry was not a revolver, but knowledge. Cochise County was wide and dry, with long valleys, empty deserts, hidden canyons, and tall mountains that separated Arizona from Mexico. Rustler gangs used this land like a maze. They stole cattle, crossed the border, and waited until lawmen grew tired of chasing them. Then they returned to steal again. Most sheriffs before John avoided long pursuit. Some feared the border. Others lacked the skill to track criminals without clear trail marks. But John Slaughter was different. He knew the land like a second language. He read hoof prints like sentences. He could smell direction from wind and dust. One of his first major tasks as sheriff involved a band of cattle thieves who operated at night. The group ambushed cattle herds near ranch fences, cut wire lines, and drove stolen animals toward rocky hills where tracking was nearly impossible. John studied each case carefully. He asked ranchers for details: where the cattle disappeared, what time the theft happened, what brands were taken, and whether the ground showed fresh horse tracks. Then he rode to the crime scenes alone. He knelt down, ran his fingers through dust, and studied hoof prints under the moonlight. He did not guess, he observed. On one investigation, John found a broken bush branch, a disturbed fence section, and a set of horseshoes that looked uneven. The marks repeated in several theft areas. He realized the rustlers used the same horse over and over, a horse that dragged its back hoof slightly. That meant one rider was always present. John followed faint tracks west for miles until they faded in a rocky gully. Most lawmen would have stopped and returned home. John did not. He waited for morning light, walked to higher ground, and looked for disturbed stones and scratches on rock surfaces. He could tell that hooves had passed through, but the trail was faint. Instead of forcing speed, he slowed down and studied the land for an entire day. By late afternoon, he found a new sign: dry manure from cattle that had been moved illegally. Not many people could identify the age or health of cattle droppings, but John learned such skills on the trail. He whispered, "less than 12 hours old." He mounted his horse and followed the trail again. Hours later, near sunset, he spotted smoke from a small campfire hidden in a canyon pocket. He tied his horse quietly and crawled 2 higher rocks. Rustlers sat around a fire eating beans, unaware that Sheriff Slaughter was watching from above. He did not attack immediately. He studied the group, counted the men, and learned their patterns. When darkness fell, Slaughter rode back to town to gather 2 trusted deputies. He wanted justice, not reckless glory. The next dawn, the deputies and Slaughter rode back toward the canyon. When the rustlers woke and tried to escape, Slaughter cut off their exit path. A few shots were exchanged, but the fight ended quickly. 2 thieves were arrested. One escaped into Mexico. John returned the stolen cattle to the ranchers, but that was only the beginning. News spread that Sheriff Slaughter investigated crime with determination and patience. Instead of waiting behind a desk, he rode into danger like a seasoned scout. Criminals did not understand how he could find them across miles of empty ground. Rustlers soon told each other, "Slaughter finds you even when you leave no tracks." His reputation grew. Not all confrontations involved bullets. Sometimes John used strategy and silence. For example, a group of horse thieves began stealing animals from a small ranch east of Tombstone. The thieves always rode fast, leaving dust clouds behind. They disappeared near a crooked canyon with tall brush and narrow passes. Instead of chasing them blindly, John camped for 3 nights near the canyon entrance. He listened for hoofbeats, watched shadows, and memorized the way wind carried sound. On the 4th night, he heard fast riding and saw 3 silhouettes moving through brush. He waited until the thieves grew tired and stopped to water horses. Then, under moonlight, John approached from the back and surprised them before they could draw weapons. No one fired a shot. He tied their hands and rode them back to town at sunrise. Villagers who saw the quiet arrest were amazed. John reminded them, "Justice is strongest when it arrives without noise." What impressed people most was how John handled fear. Outlaw gangs often sent messages threatening violence. Some sheriffs would have reacted with anger. John reacted with silence. He understood what many lawmen did not fear does not control a prepared mind. When criminals realized they could not intimidate him, many stopped trying. There were more dangerous confrontations as well. One occurred near Bisbee, where a gang of stagecoach robbers had been ambushing travelers for months. The gang hid in twisting ravines and attacked from behind rocks. No sheriff had found them successfully. John Slaughter rode through the ravines at night, using moonlight to find unusual rock arrangements and hoofprints that matched previous robberies. His patience paid off. One night, he spotted campfire ash near a dry riverbed. By morning, he surrounded the gang with 2 deputies. A fierce gunfight followed. Bullets cracked through the desert air. Dust clouds rose like smoke. Horses reared, and stones scattered. But John stayed steady, firing with precision and courage. When the fight ended, the robbers surrendered. They were taken to Tombstone for trial, and stagecoach travel finally became safer. Families thanked Sheriff Slaughter for restoring security to their roads. Merchants said they could finally send money and supplies without tremors of fear. John reminded them again. Peace is not luck. Peace is the result of work. Month after month, troublemakers left Cochise County. Some fled into Mexico. Others abandoned crime entirely. A few even visited John years later and said he had scared them straight. Under his watch, law did not feel temporary. It felt permanent, like shade from a strong tree. And little by little, Cochise County began to breathe again. Cochise County slowly became safer, but one gang refused to be controlled. Their name drifted across Arizona and northern Mexico like a dark whisper. They were known as the Jack Taylor Gang, and they were no ordinary rustlers. The gang was led by a man named Jack Taylor, a skilled horseman and coal planter. He spoke both English and Spanish, moved across borders without hesitation, and trained his men to move fast and quiet. Their targets were not cattle, but trains, heavy stage lines, moving gold, silver, and payroll money. Train robberies made Jack Taylor famous among criminals and feared among lawmen. The gang waited near desert canyons or mountain passes where trains slowed. They used explosives to break into mail cars and were gone before dust settled. Local sheriffs grew frustrated. Deputies followed them, only to lose trail across empty valleys or into Mexico, where American officers could not legally enter. Miners, bankers, and stage drivers begged for protection. Travelers refused to carry valuables unless guarded by armed riders. Entire businesses slowed down because the Jack Taylor Gang created a feeling no frontier family could escape. Danger could arrive at any moment. When word reached Sheriff John Slaughter, he studied every robbery report. He rode to train stations, inspected broken safes, and questioned frightened drivers. Every robbery left similar signs, small boot prints, 3 horses with similar shoes, and well-organized timing. The gang did nothing by chance. Their robberies were planned like military operations. John understood something of the sheriffs. Missed. Jack Taylor was not stealing for thrill. He was stealing for control. He wanted power, not coins. Many lawmen before Slaughter tried to chase the gang. Some reached the border, but stopped because crossing into Mexico risked international trouble. But something inside John grew louder each day. If a criminal hides behind a border, law means nothing. He believed justice could not stop where fear began, so he did not wait for more crimes. He rode south, slowly and carefully, gathering intelligence from ranchers near the border. Many Mexican families respected him because he spoke Spanish with humility and understood cultural traditions. They shared rumors of hidden camps, campfire smoke, and stolen horses being traded at night. John listened quietly, thanked every family, and continued riding. One evening, he reached a dusty Mexican settlement where elders remembered hearing shots days earlier. They described the riders and the behavior of their horses. John understood their information immediately. It was the Jack Taylor Gang. He returned to Arizona and sent word to Mexican rurals, a group of disciplined mounted police. Instead of acting like a lone hero, John wanted partnership. He believed Cooperation created stronger justice than pride. A Mexican officer named Captain Pascual agreed to help. Pascual respected Slaughter for his honesty and calm thinking. Pascual said, "We do not chase criminals. We remove them." John nodded together. They developed a plan. They learned that the gang used a mountain pass with small caves, water supply, and thick brush for hiding. The location allowed quick escape if Americans arrived from the north or Mexican officers arrived from the south. It was the perfect fortress. But John understood something beyond location. He understood routine. Criminals' repeated habits. Same. Water sources, same sleeping spots, same lookout points. John and Pascual watched from a distance for 2 nights. They saw a small fire glow against rocks. They counted shadows. They listened to the sound of horses breathing. The camp was real. Before dawn, they moved forward with a circle maneuver. Mexican ruralists approached from one side of the ridge. John and a single deputy approached from the other. Bullets cracked through morning air. Jack Taylor's men reacted quickly, firing from canyon walls. Horses scattered, dust spun in angry spirals. But John did not rush. He used rocks for cover and shot only when a target was clear. His revolver moved with confidence, never sloppy, never desperate. One outlaw tried to escape through the brush. John followed on foot, kneeling, breathing, watching dust patterns. As the man raised his pistol, John fired first. The shot was clean. The outlaw fell. Meanwhile, Mexican ruralists captured 2 gang members alive. Another was injured. Jack Taylor himself escaped into deeper brush, wounded but still dangerous. The battle lasted less than an hour. When silence finally returned, the canyon felt heavy, like all the fear of past robberies had been released into the wind. Pascual looked at John and said, "Your patience is stronger than their guns." John did not smile. He knew the pursuit was not over until Jack Taylor himself was brought down. Criminal leaders never stayed hidden for long. They needed resources. They needed allies. Sooner or later, desperation would force Taylor to move. 2 months passed. One afternoon, John heard a rumor from a Mexican merchant. Taylor had been spotted near a river camp, limping badly and traveling alone. John did not hesitate. He rode with Pascual's rurales again. The 2 groups crossed a twisting riverbed and approached a cluster of thorn trees. Jack Taylor was sleeping, beside a saddle, thinking no one could find him. He woke suddenly, saw John, and reached for a pistol. Slaughter did not fire immediately. He gave Taylor a chance to surrender, but Taylor refused. He raised his revolver with trembling hands. A final shot echoed dot when Jack Taylor fell. The long shadow he cast across Arizona and Mexico finally disappeared. Stage routes reopened. Banks breathed again. Families slept without dread. Newspapers wrote about the daring cross-border pursuit. They described John Slaughter as a lawman who would not let geography weaken justice. He did not brag. He only said, "A man cannot run forever if truth follows him." Sheriff Slaughter became feared by every outlaw gang that heard his name. He did not rule with violence. He ruled with certainty. Criminals understood something simple. You could hide from fear, but you could not hide from Sheriff Slaughter. And from that moment, Cochise County entered its safest era in decades. When news of the Jack Taylor gang spread across the Southwest, many criminals left Cochise County immediately. Some rode toward New Mexico. Some vanished into California. Others crossed into distant parts of Mexico, hoping never to be seen again. They understood something most citizens already knew. Sheriff John Slaughter could not be fooled, outweighted, or intimidated. But John never believed his mission was just to arrest criminals. He understood that true law meant more than catching outlaws. It meant guiding people toward peace, real peace, the kind that could grow roots and last. Cochise County was not a simple place. Cultures, languages, and beliefs overlapped everywhere. Anglo settlers worked alongside Mexican ranchers. Native families lived across valleys and mountains that belonged to them long before any mining town existed. Traders came from faraway cities. Soldiers rode through from time to time. And every group had reasons to mistrust the others. John knew that law was not only made from guns and courts, it was made from trust. Without trust, fear kept growing like tall weeds. Where other sheriffs used threats, John used conversation. He learned Spanish as a young cowboy and spoke it respectfully. When he greeted Mexican elders, he did not stand above them. He sat at the same table, listening before speaking. When he met native scouts, he did not demand answers. He asked questions with patience. In a frontier world where many white officials were dismissive or harsh toward non-white communities, John was different. He understood something. The land itself had taught him. No one survives the desert alone. One cold morning in early spring, a dispute began between a group of Anglo settlers and a family of Mexican ranchers. Cattle from the ranch had wandered through a broken fence onto land used by the settlers. The settlers accused the ranchers of deliberate trespassing. The ranchers said the storm had damaged the fence, and the cattle only wandered because they needed grass. Tension grew quickly. Voices rose. Both sides reached for rifles. John arrived before violence could explode. He stood between the two groups, calm and silent. He asked everyone to lower their weapons. His tone was not angry or loud. It carried the quiet authority of a man who expected to be obeyed. Slowly, rifles lowered. John walked to the broken fence line and examined it himself. He studied hoofprints, grass patterns, and damage to the posts. He explained clearly. The fence had been weakened by wind and rain, not by sabotage. He ordered the settlers and ranchers to share the cost of repairing the fence and to agree on grazing boundaries for the future. Neither side lost pride. Neither side needed punishment. What they needed was understanding. John turned to both groups and said, "Conflict grows when people assume the worst instead of asking questions." From that moment, the two families began working together. Years later, they became close friends. This kind of peaceful resolution was unusual in the Wild West. Many sheriffs believed the only way to gain respect was through gunfire or authority. John respected a different truth. Peace earned voluntarily is stronger than peace forced by violence. He also believed that cultural respect was more powerful than fear. When Mexican ranch families gathered for celebrations, John often attended as an honored guest. He danced at fiestas, shared meals under lantern light, and listened to music played with guitars and violins. He did not act like an outsider. He behaved like a neighbor. People noticed. One elderly villager told a traveler, "Sheriff Slaughter treats us like humans, not strangers." That is rare in frontier times. Native families respected him too. When he needed guidance in hard terrain, he asked native scouts rather than ordering them. He paid them fairly and trusted their knowledge of rivers, mountains, and seasonal. Whether he understood that these scouts were not sidekicks, they were experts of the land long before European settlers arrived. When a young deputy once asked John why he worked so closely with diverse groups, John answered simply, "Justice has no color, safety has no language, fairness belongs to everyone." These words reached beyond ranches and mining camps. They shaped how children in Cochise County grew up. Young boys and girls watched Sheriff Slaughter build peace without forcing fear. They learned that a strong man could also be a respectful man. Yet even as John built peace, he never allowed himself to become soft. Criminals who threatened innocent people still met his full force, but he understood the difference between dangerous enemies and ordinary neighbors in conflict. One required a gun, the other required patience. Another powerful moment came when a native boy was accused of stealing a horse. Angry settlers demanded immediate punishment. John visited the boy quietly, listened to his explanation, and learned the truth. The boy had only borrowed the horse to deliver emergency news to his sick grandmother. He returned the horse later that same day, believing no harm was done. John explained this to the settlers and reminded them that friendship required listening before judgment. The settlers apologized. The issue ended peacefully. Stories like these spread across the territory. Sheriff Slaughter had earned a different kind of fear, the fear among criminals that exact justice would come without mercy. But among honest settlers and ranch families, he earned admiration, trust, and loyalty. Even families who had once feared government officers began to send for John whenever disputes arose. Weddings, christenings, funerals, and harvest celebrations welcomed him as a protector, not an intruder. John Slaughter did not simply enforce law, he created relationships. His presence made people feel safer, not controlled. He believed deeply that a peaceful community was stronger than a guarded community. And as the months turned into years, the effect became clear. Cochise County was no longer a dry borderland. Filled with fear, it was becoming a home, a place where families could sleep at night without listening for hoofbeats, where children could ride horses without looking over their shoulders, and where business could grow without threat. And all of it happened because a calm, steady sheriff treated people with dignity, whether they were white settlers, Mexican ranchers, or native families who had lived on that land for centuries. For the first time in living memory, law felt like respect. Not domination died in peace, did not feel fragile anymore. It felt earned, as Cochise County slowly became safer. John Slaughter finally had time to build something deeply personal, not just law or order, but a true home. He had dreamed of a large ranch for many years, a place where cattle could roam freely, water was plentiful, and families could live without fear. He found exactly what he wanted near the Arizona-Mexico border. The land was wide, green in springtime, and surrounded by quiet mountains that protected cattle from strong winds. Water flowed naturally in small rivers and marshes. The soil could grow crops. Horses and cattle thrived under open sky. This land would become the San Bernardino Ranch, a place that would define the rest of John Slaughter's life. John did not build the ranch alone. He had already married a strong, intelligent woman named Viola, who understood the frontier world just as well as he did. She was not frightened by gunfire or storms. She could ride a horse, keep books, and organize visitors with grace and calm. Together, they created a home that welcomed everyone who entered: travelers, ranch hands, soldiers, merchants, and even children with nowhere to go. The ranch was not just a business. It was community. Cochise County was full of orphaned or abandoned young children. Some had lost their parents to disease. Some had been separated from families during long journeys. Others had been found alone near train stations or mining camps. Most frontier officials did not know what to do with these children. They had no proper homes to send them to. Many families were struggling themselves. But when those children reached San Bernardino Ranch, something special happened. John and Viola did not simply feed them or give them temporary shelter, they adopted them over the years. They raised more than a dozen children, boys and girls from different places and backgrounds, each with a story of loss or hardship. And although John Slaughter was known as the man criminals feared, he became something completely different inside the ranch gates. A gentle, patient father. Children would run to him when he returned from patrol. He would step off his horse, remove his hat, and let the little ones climb into his arms without hesitation. He taught them how to ride, how to care for horses, how to respect the land, and how to stay safe without becoming afraid. He did not spoil them with gifts. He spoiled them with attention. Every evening, when the sun turned the hills gold, the family would gather near the fire pit. Viola prepared food, children laughed, ranch hands told stories, and the older boys played guitars or harmonicas. Some nights were filled with singing, Other nights were quiet, with only the sound of crickets and the distant bark of coyotes. John sat peacefully in his rocking chair, watching everything with soft eyes. He had spent years bringing justice through strength. Now, in these moments, he brought peace through love. There were still dangers, of course. Wild animals, rustlers, sickness, storms. The frontier never stopped testing families. But the ranch had become strong, organized, and well-guarded. Anyone who intended harm knew that San Bernardino Ranch was protected not only by terrain and cattle hands, but by the most capable sheriff in the territory. Yet inside those walls, John never acted like a sheriff. He acted like a husband, a guide, and a father. One evening, a young boy on the ranch asked John if he ever feared his enemies. John smiled kindly and said, "Fear is a shadow. It looks big until you walk through it." The boy repeated that sentence for years, telling it to other ranch children whenever storms or uncertainty frightened them. For John, wisdom was not taught by rules, it was taught by example. Children saw him walk calmly into danger. They watched him return with the same calmness. They never saw him panic. They never saw him lose control. His steadiness became part of their personalities. But San Bernardino Ranch was not only a home for children, it was also a school for life. John taught everyone who lived there to treat cattle with respect, to read land signs carefully, to value water, to share labor, and to solve conflict before voices rose. These teachings came from decades of survival. They were lessons earned, not imagined sometimes. Traveling strangers arrived hungry and desperate. Viola gave them food, water, and shelter. John asked them nothing except honesty. If a man was polite and tired, he could sleep under the ranch roof for free. If a woman needed medical attention, Viola helped without hesitation. If a child was too frightened to speak, John would sit quietly beside them until trust grew. Kindness did not weaken John. It made him stronger. He used to say, "Guns keep criminals away. Kindness keeps families together." At dawn, he rode the land, checking cattle and fences. At midday, he taught older boys to fix saddles and ropes. At night, he talked gently with younger children, reminding them that fear fades when responsibility grows. He had become the emotional core of the ranch. Many deputies and neighboring ranchers wondered how such a hard man in public could become so soft in private. One evening, a friend asked him, "John, how do you balance justice with tenderness?" John answered, "Strength and kindness are not enemies. They belong to the same heart." It was not a speech, just truth. Life on San Bernardino Ranch continued year after year. Crops grew, cattle multiplied, weddings took place, babies were born, and funerals were held when old riders passed away. The ranch had become its own small world, powered by respect instead of fear. Visitors remembered something they never forgot. Sheriff Slaughter carried his revolver close, but he carried love closer. He could protect with force, but he could also comfort with silence. Even criminals who once feared him sometimes returned as reformed men. Some apologized for past crimes and thanked him for forcing them to change direction. John never mocked them. He shook their hands and said, "Hey, bad path is only bad until you decide to leave it." Under his roof, people learned not only how to survive, but how to heal. San Bernardino Ranch was no longer just a piece of land. It had become a symbol, a place where justice and compassion lived together, where abandoned children found family, where law felt human, and where the hardest man in Cochise County became the gentlest soul his family ever knew. As the years passed, on San Bernardino Ranch, John Slaughter continued serving Cochise County whenever danger appeared. Even when new deputies were appointed and new sheriffs took office, people still sent for him when a situation became serious. His reputation was stronger than a badge. When outlaws threatened, families would whisper, "Call Slaughter first." And John always came. He did not care about titles or elections. He cared about safety. He cared about the land he had helped shape into a peaceful community. But as time went on, the frontier began to change again. Railroads stretched farther west, carrying new settlers and organized business. Mining towns grew larger, stagecoaches became less common, families bought land and built schools. Churches and general stores appeared where only tents had once stood. Cochise County, once a land of constant fear, was finally beginning to feel civilized, and in that transformation, people realized something. Slaughter's era was not just law. Enforcement was foundation. He had brought stability when the territory needed it most. His decisions had protected ranchers, miners, families, and travelers. His calm personality had shaped how younger lawmen behaved, and his fairness had encouraged cultural cooperation instead of hatred. Yet even as younger officers took over routine duties, Slaughter himself was not ready to slow down. He still checked fences, rode horses, and helped with disputes. He still visited Mexican villages as a respected friend. He still spoke at community gatherings, reminding everyone that the land belonged to those who treated it gently, but no one outruns time. Slaughter grew older, and age became a different kind of challenge, not physical danger, but the feeling of leaving behind a world you helped build. His eyesight dimmed slightly. His knees ached after long rides. His hands, once steady on a revolver, began to tremble, ever so gently on cold mornings. His voice remained firm, but his body reminded him that he had earned every year through sweat, dust, danger, and responsibility. One evening, as he sat outside the ranch house listening to children's laughter, a young deputy stopped to speak with him. The deputy was eager, curious, and ambitious. He asked John, "How do you know when to retire from chasing trouble?" John looked at the horizon for a long moment, then answered softly, "A man retires when he trusts the men who replace him." That sentence held deep truth. For years, John had carried law like a personal burden. Now he saw younger lawmen behaving more responsibly, more peacefully, and more professionally because they had grown up watching him. That realization gave him peace, not pride, but peace. However, not all late life experiences were calm. New political struggles began forming across the territory. Business interests collided with homesteaders. Mining companies clashed with ranchers over land use and water rights. Sometimes these arguments grew fierce. Sometimes new politicians behaved with selfish ambition. Slaughter hated corruption more than gunfire. He believed political power should never be used to weaken honest families. He argued strongly for fairness in land rights, fair grazing rules, and equal treatment of Mexican and Native communities. He reminded lawmakers that law existed to protect, not exploit. Some officials agreed with him and admired him. Others disliked his influence. A few attempted to push him aside, treating him as a relic from a past era. But Slaughter did not respond with anger. He responded with clarity. If a law hurts honest people, then the law needs fixing, not enforcing. As the county continued to grow, some newer citizens forgot how violent the past had been. They walked streets safely because Slaughter and others had risked everything years earlier. But memory fades quickly in peaceful times. John never demanded praise, but Viola sometimes worried that history might forget the years of danger, the nights without sleep, and the narrow escapes that shaped the county's safety. She reminded the children and ranch workers to honor the sacrifices that made normal life possible. John would smile and tell her gently, "Good peace forgets its battles. That is the sign of real success." Yet inside, he knew something else. Peace never stays effortless. It must be protected by responsible people long after guns stop firing. As John aged further, he spent more time teaching than chasing. He trained younger cowhands and deputies how to read trails, how to negotiate conflicts, and how to remain calm during chaos. He did not teach with books. He taught by sitting near firelight, telling stories with humility. He never exaggerated danger. He described events exactly as they happened, always emphasizing patience, planning, and fairness. He believed the best lawman was not the fastest shooter, but the person who understood. A calm mind prevents most gunfights before they start. As his hair became silver, children who once ran to him for comfort became young adults ready to create their own families. Some stayed on the ranch. Others moved to nearby towns. All carried Slaughter's teachings like quiet wisdom in their hearts. San Bernardino Ranch remained busy and full of life. Weddings, births, baptisms, harvest festivals. The land became a place of celebration, not fear. Every new fence post, every cattle brand, every repaired barn was a reminder that safety and community had taken root. But late at night, when the ranch grew silent and the moon shone across long grass, John sometimes sat alone on his porch. He would remember the early days, the long gunfights, the dark canyons, the desperate chases, the fearful settlers, the cold bodies after robberies, the silent weight of responsibility. He did not feel sadness. He felt completion. He had lived through the most dangerous part of frontier history, survived without losing himself, and helped turn chaos into cooperation. His badge was no longer on his chest, but peace itself was his badge now, worn by thousands of families who slept without. Feared as his age continued its slow approach, John began to feel tired, not defeated, just quietly finished with struggle. He reminded Viola, "My work is not my name. My work is the land we leave behind." And Viola understood. She had stood beside him for decades, feeding travelers, raising children, and comforting frightened neighbors. She knew that their legacy was not law, but love, fairness, and courage. The Slaughter era had shaped the frontier into a home, and even as his hands grew slower, his spirit remained bright, steady, like a lantern no storm could blow out. Time moved slowly across San Bernardino Ranch. Seasons changed, children grew older, and cattle grazed peacefully on hills that once echoed with fear and gunfire. But as the ranch settled into quiet rhythm, John Slaughter began to feel a new kind of tiredness. Not the exhaustion of battle, but the softness of age. His hair had turned white like desert cotton. His hands, once steady on a revolver, now trembled on cold mornings. He could still ride a horse, but he rode shorter distances. He still checked fences, but he now did it with a young rider by his side. He still solved disputes, but most arguments ended quickly because his reputation alone settled them. People throughout the territory respected him deeply. Young deputies visited just to listen. Ranchers sent him letters asking for wisdom. Mexican families brought food as thank you gifts. Native families sent handmade blankets or baskets. Children who once lived in his household now visited with spouses and babies of their own. San Bernardino Ranch had become a living memory of a man who helped build peace. One autumn morning, John sat on the porch with Viola, watching sunlight drift across the grass like gold dust. Viola read a letter from a community official thanking John for helping create the safest era Cochise County had ever known. She smiled and squeezed his hand. John answered quietly, "Peace is a team effort. I only did my part." He never changed, humble, steady, and unwilling to take credit for what required many hands. As the years passed, John's body weakened, but his mind never faded. He remembered every canyon trail he had followed, every outlaw he had tracked, every fence post he had hammered into the ground, and every child he had helped raise. He also remembered the fear that once ruled the territory, nights when families hid in barns, stagecoaches that never reached their destinations, and ranchers who slept with guns under pillows. Those memories reminded him how far the county had come. One winter evening, As the ranch glowed with warm lantern light, a neighbor visited and asked John if he ever regretted dedicating most of his life to chasing danger instead of seeking comfort. John smiled gently and said, "Comfort without duty grows empty. Duty gives comfort meaning." That sentence became one of his most repeated teachings. As John entered his 80s, his body began to slow more noticeably. Some days he felt strong enough to walk the fields. Other days he stayed near the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching cows graze peacefully in the distance. But he was never unhappy. He was content. He could look at the land and see more than cattle and fences. He could see the life he had built from courage, fairness, and responsibility. He could see the children his home had protected. He could see the deputies he had trained. He could see neighbors who now lived without fear. Every sunrise reminded him of progress. One evening, a young granddaughter from the ranch crawled into his lap and asked, "Grandpa John, are you a hero?" John laughed softly, kissed her forehead, and answered, "No, heroes are only stories. I was a man who tried to do right." The child repeated those words many times throughout her life. As the ranch grew quieter, visits from friends increased. Old rangers came to reminisce. Former deputies came to express thanks. Local families came to deliver fresh food or simply enjoy conversation with the man who had changed their lives. No one arrived with gifts of wealth. Everyone arrived with gifts of respect. They remembered that John did not become famous by seeking attention. He became remembered because he never turned away from responsibility, no matter how dark or uncertain. The older John became, the more peaceful his days felt. Viola remained strong by his side, still caring for the household with grace and kindness. They often sat together on quiet evenings, listening to wind rustle through tall grass. They did not need many words. Their silence carried decades of love. John sometimes closed his eyes and whispered that the air smelled different than it had during the dangerous years, calmer, softer, like the land itself finally trusted the future. Neighbors often said that John could have become rich if he had used his reputation to collect rewards or build political power. But he never cared about wealth or fame. His reward was simply the look of peace on ordinary faces, the feeling of safety across valleys and small towns. One evening, John fell gravely ill. Doctors arrived from Tombstone, offering medicine and advice. Children and grandchildren gathered around his bed. Viola held his hand tightly. A doctor told him gently, "Your heart is tired. You must rest quietly for the days you have left." John smiled and answered with soft humor, "My heart has never run from a fight. It won't start now." But he was not speaking of violence. He was speaking of acceptance, courage, and facing the final chapter of his long life. During those final days, John remained calm and clear-minded. He asked to see every child who lived on the ranch, including those now grown. He gave them simple advice: be kind without being weak. Protect the innocent. Solve problems before anger grows. Treat every stranger with respect until they prove otherwise. And finally, the strongest law is fairness. People stood quietly around him, feeling his words settle like gentle rain. On a soft spring morning in 1922, John Slaughter took one final breath. His passing was peaceful, surrounded by family, surrounded by land he loved. Surrounded by safety, he helped create that the news spread across Cochise County and deep into Mexico. Ranchers paused their work, deputies lowered their hats, villages lit candles, families prayed, dozens of former enemies, some now reformed, placed small stones on the ranch entrance to show respect. No gun salutes were needed, no grand speeches. Where necessary, the land itself remembered. John Slaughter did not leave statues, parades, or monuments behind. But he left something greater: a whole county free from fear, a home for children who once had no home, and a legacy of fairness that shaped generations. History books often celebrate loud men with dramatic gunfights, but the real frontier changed because of people like Texas John Slaughter.com, steady, brave, fair, and unwilling to abandon the innocent. His badge was not metal. Anymore his badge became peace, and peace never forgot his name.